The three questions that were asked before Shahr Ramadan are for one subject. The first question, I'm going to mention all three questions, then we'll delve into the discussion. The first one says, I am a youth in my 20s. A youth that's 20s, in their 20s. Okay? In the old days we'd call them an adult, but they call them youths now. How do I please my parents and make them happy? This is the first question. The second one says, we live in a society where children have become more religious than their parents. I beg to differ. You know? This causes certain difficulties in a life, such as the way they think and their views on certain matters compared to parents. The reason you feel this way is because you're immature and your parents are mature. That's why you have a difference. Okay, at the same time, Allah has asked us to obey our parents. And hence this can be hard, as you may argue with them, as we don't agree with some things on our beliefs and it is different to them. I just want to explain before I move forward. A lot of the believers at the time of Rasulullah were the children of parents in the Jahiliyyah. You need to remember this. So Rasulullah and Allah Azza wa Jal, when they brought down this command, they weren't bringing it down to the son of Allam al-Halli. Do you know what I mean? They were bringing it down for a law that would cover everybody. It's for everyone, but we'll go on. Okay. How do we tackle this problem? It can be hard, especially if you are wrong. If a wrong thing is happening and they are doing it and you feel the need to speak out and tell them, but at the same time respect them. Almost all the time they will not be happy if you tell them what to do, as they have more rights over us than we have over them. What we can do in society is like this. And the third one is, how can someone balance pleasing their parents but also not over intruding on their husband's life? These are the three questions we will cover in this discussion. First one being how to please your parents. Second one being how to deal with your parents. And the third one is, who has more priority, my husband, if I'm a female, or my parents. All right, to begin with, comes to raising your children, to begin with, is where it all starts. See, a lot of people have this opinion where they say, look, our teeth have been removed and our claws have been removed, so we can't raise our children. Once again, I beg to differ. That's wrong, because the way that the raising was done before wasn't necessarily correct. Things don't work with violence. There is violence, there is discipline, and you want to call it violence, then it is violence. There is discipline. There is a good word. There is bribery with a child, giving them something. All these combined are to do with raising the child. And strong physical force was never the solution. In the old days, that was always what happened. If it wasn't your teacher beating on you, it was the police. If it wasn't the police beating on you, it was your parents. This is how it was in the past. Everyone would hit you. And that's the way it worked. You just kept getting hit because that was the way for you to be raised. The funny thing is, for some reason, this was only implemented when it came to your academic progress. You always got hit. Why? Because your marks weren't counted at school. You could have the worst akhlaq. You see some kids, they got swear words come out of their mouth all the time. As long as they got good grades at school, parents say Ibn Adam. I remember I told you this story. I was at the Qadhmiyyah. This was not last year, just before Corona by a year. And we were sitting with this guy, and he was boasting about how good his children are. And what was this? This is honest. This is next to Maqam Imam al-Qadhim. So I imagine the Imam has to put up with hearing people like this. This man said, my kids are good. They all have degrees. I don't have any laborers amongst them. So for him, the scale of a good kid and a bad kid is a degree. Yes, it is a degree. It's how many degrees they get burnt on the Day of Judgment, if that's the way you want to see it. The difference between a good kid and a bad kid is in the scale that Allah Azza wa Jal has set. Yes, they used to make sure their kids were getting good marks, but there was no discipline when it came to getting your son to pray on time. There was no discipline when it came to getting your daughter to wear hijab on the time she became eligible to wear hijab. That wasn't an issue at the time. But everything else, they would do this. Now, parents tend to complain the opposite, that their kids have become insolent in this age. But, you reap what you sow. You raise insolent kids, you're going to get insolent kids. You raise kids like, if you take a look, honestly, these people send you videos. I remember someone sent one of those, I don't know if it was a TikTok or whatever video, of a girl asking her father, it was in ridicule, something, and the father responds in a really aggressive way, and people say, oh, look the way he responded. I said, this father is not worthy to breathe our air. So what? I go, he's seated, she's sitting on a shisha, and her legs are crossed in his face. In his house, not in her house. In his house, that's the way he's been treated. He should not be allowed to share the air with us. This is a person that has failed as a parent, period. If that's the way he's been respected in his own house. Why? Because I will tell you this over and I'll reiterate it. Who feeds your kids? You do. Who washes their clothes? You do. Who cleans their room? You do. So while they're living in your house, if they are insolent, whose fault is it? It's yours. Because they're in your house. And you're still doing all these little favors for them, then you are accepting the acts of what they do. Now we turn towards the children. How must I be with my parents? How must I deal with my parents? Allah Azza wa Jal is very clear with this. He says in the Quran, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. Firstly, Allah Azza wa Jal, you know what wasiyya is? You generally hear the word wasiyya, we think it means the will. Allah Azza wa Jal is not going to die to leave you a will. A wasiyya here is a commandment of Allah. It's an order from Allah. Allah Azza wa Jal says, just like Rasulullah, when we say that Rasulullah wassa with his Ahl al-Bayt, he commanded the people to follow his Ahl al-Bayt. It's a commandment that Allah Azza wa Jal says, I have commanded you with your parents, and he mentions ihsana. Something that people always fail to understand. When we say, all right, my parents aren't as religious as I am, or my parents aren't as good as I am, this is how people start to think. That's not the condition that's there. The condition with dealing with your parents doesn't say what your parents are like. Have a look at all the verses. No verse ever says, listen, if your parents are bad, don't be good to them. I've never seen any narration. In fact, I've seen the exact opposite. In the Holy Quran, if I was to ask you right now, what is the greatest sin someone can commit? If you look at the greatest sins, what's number one? Shirk. Does anyone have any doubt that shirk is the greatest sin? No one has a doubt. But shirk on the day of judgment does not get forgiven. Every sin is forgiven, possibly except shirk. Allah does not forgive shirk on the day of judgment. Whoever takes partners with God is not forgiven on the day of judgment, unless they repent in the dunya. Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَإِن, and if. He says, Jahadak, ala an tushrik bi. So firstly, I need to understand, what does Jahadak mean? Jahadak is talking about one person or two people, talking about both parents. Jahadak, if your parents, both your parents, not only one, even if both. Jahadak, ala an tushrik bi. If they strive and they exert themselves on you to do what? To make you commit shirk with Allah. Is there anything bigger than that? Allah Azza wa Jal says, tushrik bi ma laysa laka bihi ilm. Take partners in God with what you do not know. Then Allah says, فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا. Do not obey them. Does he tell you, do not obey them as in go to hell? Or astaghfirullah, I'm not going to be a devil like you, or no. He says, وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. They came to make me commit shirk. He says, be what? He says, treat them with an appropriate kindness. As much as you can be kind to them. Nowhere does he say here not to be good. In fact, Allah gives you examples. Where? He gives you example of Musa with Pharaoh, and the example of Ibrahim with his uncle Azar. How do they both deal? Musa was raised in the house of Pharaoh. He did not forget the moment that he was there. So Allah Azza wa Jal says to him, قُلْ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Don't be stern with Pharaoh. Why? Because you were in his house at one stage. This is never forget the ma'ruf, the good that they have done. The same token, Ibrahim, who was raised around his uncle Azar. What was Azar's job? He was an idol maker. Like this guy, forget someone exerting you to commit shirk. This guy, the buck stops with him. He makes them. You know, he invented those. He made these things. Ibrahim was always very respectful to him. Yet he wasn't the walid of Ibrahim. He wasn't his biological father. Was he? Yet even in this stance, he was good with him. Okay. So, the importance of dealing good with your parents cannot be more emphasized than in this verse that I mentioned. Okay. How do I deal with my parents? You want to know, when we say birr al-walidain, what does it mean? Birr al-walidain, does it mean birr as in being good to them? Is that what it means only? And I go back again. We're not talking about good. I'm not talking if your father is Sheikh al-Mufid. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking if your father's alim. I'm talking about even if your father is insolent. And I'll get to this point as we move along. Because Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And I'll get, like I said, I'll get to this point as we move along. Firstly, is the way we talk and walk and deal with our parents. And if you look at the precision in the narrations when it comes to these things, just to begin with, and listen to this, the Imam, the seventh holy Imam says Allah Azza wa Jal does not give any concessions when it comes to parents. Barran or fajr. Do you know what that means? If it's a righteous parent or it's a fajr, it's an immoral parent. You have no concessions. You have to be good. There's no concessions. Don't say, oh, look, this person. I remember one brother called me. He said that his mother drinks and she's always drunk. And he said that the words that come out of her mouth, Ya Ilahi. He says she brings God down and all these angels. You got to know how some. So how do I deal with her? He's married. I said, if you even have to call her once a month, how are you, how's things? And just dodge all the swear words. Imagine like you've walked into a female's toilet and everyone went nuts. Dodge all the swear words at this point. She's thrown a million, that example doesn't work today because, with all the people not knowing what they are. But anyway, so you dodge all these swear words. How are you, mum? Good, thanks, bye. That's it. That's your duty. If she's like that, that's your duty. As long as there's that goodness between me and her. Because she doesn't want anything to do with him. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay. How is it when it comes to some of the things? Okay, if we take a look at the way we walk. Sometimes you'll see people coming into the Husayniyah with their parents. Some of the children, they walk into the Husayniyah before their parents. I'm supposed to never precede my parents. Never be in front of them, always be behind them. This is respect. Not I have to be first. No, my parents come first before me. This is birr al-walidain. Another thing, I should not sit before they sit. When they enter to sit, I wait and I allow them to sit before I sit. I know you see little kids, they'll run and sit in their parents' seat before they do. But if you're still doing this, okay, and you're a teenager, you've got some serious issues if it's still carried on to that time. Now, another thing is not to raise your voice when you talk above theirs. I'm in the presence of my parents, I shouldn't be shouting in the room. My parents are home, my voice should always be lower. This is something that is emphasized. Even Allah Azza wa Jal says it to the believers when it comes to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. He says, do not raise your voice above the Prophet's voice. This is a part of respect. Someone raises their voice and their parents are at home. This is like showing their parents that you don't have any authority here. You should be like you're in a library. You've been in a library? What do people do in a library? You know, or in the case these days, people don't go to libraries, in a cinema. This is probably something they can relate to more. You know? I have to be that quiet, whisper quiet. Another thing is, don't ever address your parents. You know, see sometimes a kid, they'll call their parents by their first name. Your parents, you either call them Zimbabwe or Mama or whatever you call them, or if you're going to call them by their name, use their kunya. Abu Fulan or father of Fulan. This is the only way. You don't mention their name other than that. I know sometimes we're going to get to the point, you might think, hold on, but you don't know my parents. You know, some people tell me, you don't know my parents. We'll get to that as we move along. Even when it comes to eating with your parents, Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein alayhi salam would say he would seldom eat with his mother because he feared that he would take a morsel that she wanted. Do you understand what that means? In case she wanted to eat something and he ate it before her. These days you see a child, he'll always take, as we call it in Lebanese, le'min mastayyi. He'll eat it before the parents can eat. Or something's packed away for their father or their mother, they go eat it. Because they don't have this respect for their parents. When you see the verse or the words ahsan to the parents, what does it mean? Our fuqaha, our jurists have come to the conclusion that ahsan means do not do anything that displeases your parents. Okay? So this is relative to them. What is it that they consider disrespectful? Okay. Here's some things. Number one, not compelling them to beg you to do something. If you know your parents want something done, just do it. Don't wait for them to ask you. Don't wait for them to beseech you. Don't wait for them to implore you. Before they ask you to do it, go do it. You know your parents want you to do something, just do it. Don't make it a task for them to come and ask you to do this thing. Okay. Another thing you'll see today is when people have invited, they'll invite people and they say, I'm not going to invite my mother or I'm not going to invite my father. And you say, why not? Oh yeah, my mother doesn't like my mother-in-law. So you've put your mother-in-law above your mother. What do you mean they don't? You invite them both. If they have a fight, just get the popcorn. Because you can't really do anything about it. But you invite your parents. You always give them this position. That was a joke, you know. But anyway, that's what you do. You give them this respect. Another thing is if I'm traveling and I bring back presents. So you see some people when they get married, that's it. Their mother doesn't count anymore. They make sure they get for their wife. You know, they make sure their wife gets a good present, and then for their mother, you know, they probably, like, they get their wife the perfume bottle, and they'll get their mother the sample that they give you with 5 mils in it. Here you go, Mum. You know, if she's lucky. The mother has to have a position where she gets the best gift. The father gets the best gift. This is something that is an obligation upon you. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in the Quran, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. So Allah Azza wa Jal has decreed that you do not worship other than Him, and to do what? And to be good to your parents, as I mentioned, not to displease them. He says, إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِنْدَكَ الْكِبَرِ أَحَدُهُمَا أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. Firstly, Allah mentions what? When they get old. Why? I feel as I'm aging, as we age, we start becoming more irritating. We know this. That's normal. The older you get, you're more irritable. Why? Because you've had enough. So at this point, this is where the child has to be on extra special care with their parents. They've got to care more towards their parents. They've got to have more regard towards their parents when they get this old. And Allah Azza wa Jal mentions here in the Quran, do not even say off. Al-Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammed al-Sadiq salawatullahi alayhi says, أدنى العقوق أفٍ ولو علم الله شيئا أهون منه لنهى عن. So the least of uquq, the least of insolence or being bad to your parents is to say off. Make a noise when they ask you to do something. He says if there was something less than this, then Allah would have prevented us from this. In another narration, as I mentioned about ihsan or ahsin, in this narration, it's mentioned عن الإمام أبو عبد الله الصادق صلوات الله وسلامه عليه الإحسان أن تحسن صحبتهما. Ihsan is to keep good friendship with them, accompany them well. وأن لا تكلفهما أن يسألاك شيئا مما يحتاجان إليه. This is what I mentioned before. Do not make them ask you for something that they need you to do. Your parents expect you to make your bed when you wake up, you make your bed. Your parents expect you to clean your room, you clean your room. Don't wait for them to ask. Whatever they tell you to do, don't wait. This is the position. If you take a look at the Dhunub al-Kabira, the greatest sins for Sayyid Dasdghaib, you will find the sixth greatest sin that he has is what? Uquq al-Walidain. That's number 6. Do you know what's just above it? Murder. This is the next worst sin after murder. Is being insolent to your parents. Okay. Now, this is a thing I wanted to mention before and I want to explain. There are people that we have to deal with, okay, in society. There's individuals in society that you have to deal with, and like as I mentioned before, almost everyone you meet, not everyone, almost everyone you meet is someone's parent, someone's father and someone's mother. And some people are so despicable, you can't even deal with them. Yet someone in this world is obligated to respect them. This is God's mercy. Why? Why am I obligated to have this regard and respect to my parents? Because, as you see right now, how many people have been aborted a year? Your parents always had the option of aborting you. From the very beginning, they could have just killed you. But instead, your mother carried you. She carried you for those 9 months. Then, she gave birth to you. Whether after she gave birth, she said, look, I don't want him, I'm going to throw him where? I'm going to throw him in an orphanage. No, worse. I'm going to throw him in a bin, in a solo bin. Really, think about this. When you grow up, you know she's your mother, what do you have to do? Is it worse than her exerting you to become a mushrik? No. I have to ahsan sahbatahuma. I still have to be good to them. Imagine your parents are mu'minin ya waylakum. If your parents are righteous believers and you're not good with him, God help you on the day of judgment. This is something you have to think about, really think about. That if your parents are mu'min, your parents are righteous. Imagine if your parents are decadent. Your parents are people, imagine your father is someone that's scorned in the community. Your mother is someone that's scorned in the community. People don't respect them. You have to respect them. Imagine if your parents are elevated in the community. Imagine the ulama that had bad children, the children that weren't respectful to their parents. What happens to these kids on the Day of Judgment? Hala, the pendulum swings both ways. If you're a bad kid and you're not respectful to your parents because your parents were bad parents, both of you get punished. So God is just. He says, look, you're bad. Yeah, you say, yeah, well, my dad was bad with me. Yeah, that's all right. He was going to get punished, but you just joined him. You could have been good. He would have got punished alone. I just need to be good. Even inside, I don't like them. If some people, they tell you inside, I don't like my parents. Why? They say they were evil to me. And they'll tell you stories you can't even imagine. If it suffices with a phone call, then a phone call. Imagine the stories that people have told me. It's a phone call to just say that I have to deal with them, then so be it. But imagine that your parents are good and then the manner this changes. Our parents are the ones that Allah has given this significance because it shows whether you have gratitude or you don't have gratitude. Sometimes I remember this guy once said, he said if there wasn't God, astaghfirullah, he said if Allah didn't exist, he said, لَعَبَدْتُ فُلَانَ الْفُلَيْنِ, I would worship so-and-so. He was a Lebanese politician, I don't need to tell you who he is, but he's someone that has a lot of money. But he said, I would have worshipped him. And I said, why? He said, because when I was building my house, they came to prevent me from building, and I got wasta from him, I got some paper from him, and it prevented them from preventing me from building. This guy was willing to worship him after God for a piece of paper. What about the one that carried him for 9 months? What about the one that would wake up every part of the night for him? Where is her position if someone wrote a piece of paper and you think they're God? Where is their position? This is what we're talking about, being gratitude. You get people that worship musicians because they're musicians. Nothing else. I remember once I was lecturing overseas and I mentioned that Michael Jackson is in the fire of hell. And these people got upset. And I said, you know what, you're right. He looked after little kids, so he must have been a good bloke. You know? The way that people think that why? Because they say, why? His music was nice. He danced really well. I didn't bring it up in the speech. Someone actually asked about him. I think he had just died at the time. You know, it would have been good if I was there 10 years before that in the United Kingdom. They asked me about Lady Diana. I would have given them the good news as well. But anyway, the thing is, I'm going to finish off with just quickly answering slightly these questions and then giving you a hadith. So I've given you basically the first one that says, how do I please my parents? This is how you please them. By doing the things that make them happy and not to disrespect them. How do I deal with my parents if I'm very religious and my parents don't have any religion? I do what I need to do religiously, but I don't upset them. I keep them happy. If they tell me to do something haram, I will make a way out of it. I say, you know, I don't really want to do this. I don't feel comfortable. They tell me off. But I can't. When it comes to God, I can't choose them over God. It stops there. For example, if a woman is married and her husband says, I want you to remove your hijab, and she says no, which she should, and then he says, I will divorce you. Our fuqaha say, get divorced and don't remove your hijab. It stops there. There's no playing around there. God comes first. So then in the third situation, who do I choose? My parents or my husband? If a husband gives a woman an ultimatum, he has no position to tell a woman to do something haram either, because this is silat al-arham. You can't tell her unless the parents are a harm to his family. There are serious harm, you know. Say he's got a creepy father-in-law, something like that. This is where she has the duty to protect her children. When I say creepy, we're talking about someone that might do things to kids. I don't need to spell it out. And she has a duty to protect the children from such a father-in-law. But the man should not put a woman in a position to choose between her parents and him. Because in the end, his position is more important than the parents, without a doubt. If a woman has to choose, her husband comes always before the parent. There's no ambiguity here. And it's the opposite in terms of the parent. The man has to listen to his father before his wife. It's different there. But in this case, but doesn't mean if my father says, listen, you get cases where parents tell their kids, all right, listen, can you go jump off a bridge? And the kid goes and does it. No, it doesn't mean listen to them when they tell you to do something silly. I need to weigh up. I don't just say, oh, my mum said I have to do it. No, I've got to weigh up what's been said. I don't displease her. I speak a nice word, but I don't do everything. Doesn't mean verbatim I follow them. Because, your parents are human beings. They can take you to the wrong places as well. So there has to be a balance there. We're talking about being good. Now, you need to know that you can never fulfill your parents' rights ever. But I'm going to finish off with one narration. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam is talking to his companions, sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And he says, فَجَاهِدْ فِي سَبِيلَ اللَّهِ, fight in the way of God. فَإِنَّكَ, he's telling one of the companions, فَإِنَّكَ إِن تُقْتَلْ تَكُنْ حَيًّا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ تُرْزَقْ. Fight in the way of God. And if you die, you are killed, then you will be living with God and you will be sustained. He says, وَإِن تَمُتْ. So what it means here, if you die, this doesn't mean you were killed. It could be from an injury in the battle and you return. He says, فَقَدْ وَقَعَ أَجْرُكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. So if you die because of the battle, that your result, your reward is with Allah Azza wa Jal. And then he says, وَإِن رَجَعْتَ مِنَ الذُّنُوبِ كَمَا وَلِدْتَ. And if you return from the war and you do not get killed, nor do you die, then he says, you return as if you were born again. This is what jihad is. Imagine the greatness of jihad fi sabilillah. Then the man says, Ya Rasulullah, I have elderly parents. And these parents, he says, have comfort and they with me being present, and they don't want me to go to war. He's wahdain, he's the only child, and they prefer me because they're elderly, they need my support. They have comfort with my presence in the house. Then the messenger of God says to him, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, he says, فَقِرَّ مَعْ وَالِدَيْكَ فَوَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ. He says, stay with your parents. This is a command of the messenger of God. He says, by the one who carries my soul, meaning by Allah, he swears by God. He says, La unsuhuma, giving them this comfort with you. He goes, Bika yawman, just one day where they feel comfort with your presence. He says, Walayla. So this day and night that you spend, just one, he says, Khayrun min jihadi sana. One day and one night that you make your parents happy is better than fighting in the way of God for 1 year. One day and one night. For some people it's easy because they've got pleasant parents. For some people it's difficult. Because I said, not all parents, we're understanding. We're not people, and I wasn't talking about you. You're an awesome dad. There's some people are what? Are blessed to have good parents. Some people have difficult parents. Regardless of what my parents are, I have to give him this duty. Inshallah, Allah Azza wa Jal makes this month come again to you over and over again. And inshallah, these months are times where you establish a relationship with God and you strengthen this relationship. Inshallah, unites us all under the dome of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam, qariban ajilan. Inshallah, Allah also unites us under the standard of our master al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Mehdi, arwahuna fida. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كل ولي هذه الساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عني شهر رمضان أو يطلع الفجر في ولك قبلي تبعة والأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والأرواح موتانا وموتاكم. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات. Just before